listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer, Elliott Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. Michael, we are now out of lying season. We're now into propaganda season, where everyone got their top-rated guy in the draft. Yeah. Everyone made out well. We set out to do what we did, and we accomplished it. It's a lot of fun now. Now we can explain away all the draft picks.
Yeah, we got draft grades. I mean, I was looking at some site the other day that I think maybe it was the worldwide leader. I think everybody got, like 3 teams got A's, everybody else got B's, and 2 teams got C's. And this is a draft, okay, so we're clear here. I tweeted this out on, I think, Saturday. So because of NIL, right, there's always cause and effect to anything that happens. Because of NIL, a lot of those kids that would have typically petitioned to see where their draft was were getting cash to stay. And look, who wouldn't want to stay in college? Let's be clear, right? I mean, that's a pretty good life, You play a little football, you got no accountability. You play your teams, they got hang out on. It's not a job. You're still an amateur technically. Mm-hmm. And so, there's 100 players that weren't in this draft that typically would have been the juniors. And because of that, the draft is really become watered down to the point where when you were picking in the 4th, 5th, I mean, what Philly did in terms of trading picks away for next year, or what Minnesota did for trading picks to get up, in terms of the draft, you can't argue because it's quality that you need, not quantity. Because remember this, Femi, all these guys that get picked from the 4th round to free agency, you probably are going to have a chance to get them at some point. Walsh used to say this all the time. The best time to add players is when nobody else wants to add them, which is in September and October. You could take 3 guys off of somebody's practice squad, 3 weeks in a row and end up with 3 5-round picks. I've always said this. The league gives you an extra 5, 2 extra 6s, and 3 extra 7s. You just got to go get them.
Yeah.
You got to be proactive enough to go get them. Your pro department's got to be willing to look at talent and go get them.
And I think it's kudos to the Philadelphia Eagles for like understanding the dynamic and Howie Roseman, understanding the dynamic of this NIL thing and saying, hey, like, let's get out of this because the talent pool isn't as rich as it typically is because guys, like you mentioned, are staying back in school. And like, hey, if you can be a student athlete and stay in school for another year, that sounds like a damn good time to me. Basically hanging out on the quad and doing all that kind of stuff there, that's a whole lot of fun. But that's why you saw the Eagles. I believe they made the most trades ever in the common draft era in this past NFL draft. Like they were wheeling and dealing, realizing that, hey, maybe let's kind of load up on next year when things sort of settle back down. I think we'll be done with all the COVID years that we had in college athletics. There'll still be NIL. That'll still be a big thing, of course. But at least like some of those older guys have now made their way through, and now you can kind of just go ahead and look at it through 4 to 5 year windows, which is typically what college athletics has been before the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and so, like, look, the Eagles, they just signed Becton, which I think, to me, Becton's got great ability. But Becton needs to stay healthy, and he needs a line coach who's going to drive him and push him to see. Because this kid could run block with the best of them. I mean, he's a physical force. He's not a blown pick. He was a blown player. He's got talent. There's no denying his talent. But his inability to stay healthy, his inability to play the game, be in condition, sounds like somebody else I've just witnessed over the weekend, but we won't get to him. That I think, to me, is we're going to find out. And the Eagles have signed their rosters really complete. And so all the guys that they could have picked in the 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds were going to probably get cut and end up on their practice squad. So why not just, not pick them, save money, put it into next year? I think it's a smart thing to do. You don't have to be in a rush. You can't solve all your problems in 1 year. I mean, that's pretty clear. And sometimes you can really hurt your team when you're spending too much time on a player you can't develop, or when you're spending too much time developing too many players. For example, the Patriots take Milton, the quarterback from Tennessee.
Yeah.
Really athletic, really talented, not the most natural quarterback, if you would, but he's going to require a lot of player development time. And every moment that you're spending trying to develop Joe Milton, you're taking it away from Drake May. Like, there's just not enough time. And so Milton's going to get cheated here. And we're really never going to know if Milton's good enough because he's not going to get, he's a 24/7 project, 24/7. He needs a coach with him constantly to see if you can get him to change and anticipate and do something to become a backup quarterback and eventually become a starter. That requires a lot of time. You don't have that much time. You got to get made at that point.
Yeah.
So when you're drafting, you got to ask yourself the question, do we have enough resources to develop the player? Whereas if you take offensive linemen late in the draft, the line coach has got plenty of time. They're all going to get developed the same way because they're all like they're a pack of cattle. They're all herded together.
Hitting the sled. Let's go, boys. Let's go ahead and do this thing. For the record, the Eagles, they added a third, a fourth, and a fifth round draft pick for next year's draft in 2025. So they kind of been looking to eyes toward the future, knowing that their team was pretty much set outside of those top two picks, taking those corners, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean there. Obviously, a lot of the buzz from this draft still has to do with the Atlanta Falcons. We're not going to spend as much time as we did on Friday, but we'll still got to hit it because we're still looking to see what the other side is saying. Like, are we just being just so singularly focused and not seeing the big picture? Well, our good buddy over at the Worldwide Leader, our good buddy Danny O, was on Rich Eisen's show and was kind of giving the Falcons a little bit of credit and sort of presented the other side of this pick with Michael Penix at pick 8 that we saw Thursday night. Here's what he had to say, and we'll react to it on the other side.
The vision of looking forward, I understand. I do. I see both parts of the argument and the conversation, but when someone sits there and says, like, this guy we thought so highly of that if we were at 2, Jaden Daniels goes at 2, like we thought they were that same type of quarterback. I understand it. I do. And I think it's smart because we have so many teams and they realized they weren't going to be able to get up in the future. Like they just like Raheem came from the Rams, right? What have the Rams done for years with their number 1 pick? Get rid of it because it's pointless. It's eventually. And I think that's what they envisioned what their next couple years with Kirk is going to be is they're going to be picking late in the first round.
I still don't understand it, me personally, but.
I don't think he made a defense of it. Look, I don't dislike the guy. I'm trying to I wanted to put him on today because I love this Jack Nicholson quote. I think this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, where Jack Nicholson says, I love discourse. I'm dying to have my mind changed. I'm probably the only liberal who read Treason by Ann Coulter. I want to know, you understand. I like listening to everybody. This, to me, is the elixir of life. Like, I want to know where he's coming from. And so what he was saying there really makes no sense because why didn't the Chargers take J.J. McCarthy? Yeah. They had him as the best quarterback in the draft. They were very clearly saying that. They made no bones about he was the best quarterback. Why didn't they take him? Why doesn't somebody ask the Chargers, if this is so smart, why don't you take J.J. McCarthy? And I think, to me, where I don't think Dan understands, where I kind of have the most indignation towards the Falcon front office is you should know that you're going to draft Penix in February or you're going to consider him in February. This is a lack of preparation. See, the Penix idea alone is a good idea.
Yep.
The Kirk Cousins idea alone is a good idea. The two together are a horrible idea. It's like the opposite of a good idea can be another good idea. But this is not practical. It goes back to time and reps. And if you're the owner of the team, you got to ask Terry, Super Bowl winning GM Fontenot, like, Terry, like, why didn't we know Penix was our guy before we spent the money? Just like the Chargers knew that Herbert was their guy before they would want to draft McCarthy, even though they love McCarthy. Mm-hmm. No one's asking that question.
Yeah. And that's what we talked about on Friday. It's just like there's so many checkpoints along this process and what a general manager is supposed to do. you should have figured this out prior to saying, here's $100 million guaranteed over the next 2 years. We don't have to rehash all of that. But I do think when we spin it forward to what's going to happen in the coming months, you want to say something here real quick?
Well, no. And then I think, to me, it's like then you can really see kind of that quote we read on the air that I was talking about how, I don't think we read it on the podcast, but one of the things we read on the GM Shuffle show on Thursday night was a text I got from somebody who's no longer in the league but knows everybody, and he wrote to me saying, "You really like Raheem. I think Raheem's a great coach, but he really needs a strong general manager. He's not a great evaluator. He'll run ramshot over Terry because Terry is truly just going to let him do whatever he wants to do." And I think that happened in the second round because, they're sitting there and they trade up to get a defensive lineman who, looks the part, is, all the things you want in a player, but doesn't have any production. When they put up there that he was third team, and I can't say his name.
Yeah, I think it's Rook. I can't say the last name. I haven't practiced that one yet.
Right. I mean, the guy's third team all ACC. The guy. Arojo, yeah. Like, everybody will say, looks the part, but no instincts. No instincts at all. And he's third team all ACC, which tells you he had, the coaches didn't think he had it. And they traded up to get him. They traded more assets. So you could see who's running this draft. And it really is Raheem. Terry's just going to acquiesce to everything they want to do. He's just in there. That's not general managing. See, that's the thing that makes this insane is Belichick wanted too much control. That's what they told you. Mm-hmm. But now Raheem Morris has way more control than any of them, and doesn't have 6 Super Bowls to his name. So to me, it's just all rhetoric. Look good in the suit, great Rolex, love it, all that. But you didn't make your team better.
Yeah. And it's making your team better for 2024, which you thought could be a contending year, which is why you went out and signed Kirk Cousins in the first place. It doesn't really marry together, at least is what we're saying. I do want to get to the Cousins-Penix dynamic because Cousins is still rehabbing off of the Achilles injury. Penix is going to be taking a lot of these reps in OTAs and minicamp. How's that going to go over?
That locker room's going to be fun to talk about.
Uh-huh. We'll get into that next and also break down some of the other drafts here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
So the Atlanta Falcons have created an interesting dynamic in their locker room because you signed Kirk Cousins to the big contract, but Kirk Cousins, obviously this is his first year with the Atlanta Falcons, doesn't really have the equity in the locker room because, hey, these guys don't know him. They've never seen him play, for them at least. They've seen him play, of course, with the Vikings and in Washington, but they haven't seen him do it in Atlanta. And now you bring in Michael Penix Jr., who I'm guessing is going to be taking the majority of these first-team reps throughout OTAs, throughout minicamp. We'll see if Cousins is ready to go for training camp or if he has to start on PUP or whatever. He tore his Achilles in October. How do you see this kind of playing out? Like, if Penix is out there lighting it up in OTAs and minicamp, does this sort of get a little awkward for this Falcons coaching staff?
Well, it gets awkward from a team leadership standpoint, right? And so what you always want to do is you want your team to reflect the personality of the quarterback. I think we see it in Kansas City, right? Mm-hmm. That team has Patrick Mahomes' personality, competitive, tough, work hard, all that. And so that landscape was set there. Now, when Alex Smith was there, Mahomes came in with without the fanfare that, everybody knew Kansas City had a ceiling on the Alex Smith thing, right? There was a ceiling there, and his contract was getting older. Different. Where this is, look, you brought Kirk in because you told everybody you're one player away. I think it's going to be a hard dynamic in that locker room. And you're going to have to be able to stand in front, because Raheem can't stand in front of the team and say, I'm only going to play the best players. He can't say that. He can't. He gave $100 million to Kirk Cousins. He's already announced it's Kirk's team.
Yep.
So now he's diffused the whole Penix thing. And Penix is going to work with scout team and cut it loose. He's going to be a problem for the scout team, trust me. He's going to look at a card, he's going to throw the ball, and he's going to throw fastballs out there, and the players are going to recognize it. You can't fool the locker room. If you try to fool the locker room, that's when you lose credibility as a leader of the team. Because when you stand in front of them and say, we're going to play the best players, and you don't, then all of a sudden you lose credibility, because they see a hidden agenda somewhere and they wonder, am I having a hidden agenda put on me? And how do you develop a team's personality? It's a challenging job for Raheem.
Yeah, I think it's and who knows? Maybe Penix goes out there and struggles, and Cousins is good, and it's a nothing burger. But if Penix is out there just lighting it up, I think it's a really, really interesting dynamic for this team.
When you say lighting it up, it's going to be a practice light up, right? I mean, he's going to go in the preseason. Aiden O'Connell looked really good in the preseason, right? I mean, guys look good in the preseason, so don't count that. But I'm talking about a practice. Like when you talk to people in Kansas City, when Mahomes was running scout team, they're like, wow, this guy's really good. This guy's really good. When you talk to people, go back to Brady, when he was doing scout team, they all said he's really good. Like, you can see it, right? You could see it in a player. That's why you go to practice every day. That's why if you're Super Bowl winning GM Terry Fontenot, you go to practice every day. You write up reports on all the players. You study the team, and you realize what you need going into the offseason, and you can't count on it. See, here's the misconception. If the general manager isn't watching practice every single day and evaluating the players, you can't rely on the coaches. You're the O-line coach. You're coaching the 7 guys you're trying to get ready. You're not paying attention to the scout team offensive line that's going against the defense. You really don't know that. You don't have an idea of that. So somebody's got to be watching that. The head coach should be watching that. The GM should be watching that. The pro personnel, like everybody should be watching practice and making notes, because at the end of the year, those 1,000 plays from practice, you're going to evaluate. You want to make sure you're right. You don't want to count on somebody like, okay, Super Bowl winning GM Terry Fontenot, did he watch Ritter play? They were counting on him to be the starter. They blatantly turned down Lamar Jackson, sent out a press release. Well, what were you basing it on? The last 4 games, or are you basing it on the 14 practices?
Yeah, and oftentimes mistakes in team building come from misevaluating your team, and you can misevaluate if you don't even evaluate, and if you're not there at practice watching it. So,
what good? Well, he wasn't even on the road, though. That's the thing that makes it insane.
What was he doing?
I get it. Like, Ted Thompson would go on. What was he doing? Like, what was he doing? Like, what were they doing? Like, he wasn't at the University of, the bigged joke of this whole thing was that Michael Penix blew him away in the workout. Like, that's so bad, and people buy that bullshit. Like, Michael Penix had a gun. You could see he had a gun at Indiana. He had a gun at Washington. He's always had a gun. He was at the Senior Bowl. You know he was going to. He blew you away in the private. Were you at the Senior Bowl, or were you over at the steakhouse? Seriously, what were you doing at the Senior Bowl?
Apparently not watching Michael Penix. What were you doing at the Combine, where he was throwing there as well?
At the Combine, you needed to go look at Lake Washington to see that this guy was like. That's what makes it
beautiful.
See, to me, it is beautiful. I've said gorgeous. Beautiful. However, that being said, you don't need what are you doing? Where's the planning? It's like you're an architect, and all of a sudden, you're halfway building the house, and now you want to change. Now you want to rebuild something here. It's stupid. That's why if you write a book and you build it, you have outline. What's your outline? Mm-hmm. You have, everybody, I don't know, I was trained by people. You have a must list. If we don't get these things we must get this. We need this, and we want that. Those are the 3 things. Philadelphia, that's all they're doing. We must get this. We need that. Based on what they wrote up, based on what they saw, not based on what the media is telling them. There's none of that.
Well, let's talk about some of these other teams and what they did in the NFL draft. I know you wanted to highlight the Buffalo Bills, who moved down multiple times in that first round. They ended up picking at the top of the second round, taking Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State. I think a lot of people thought that wide receiver was a good chance that they were going to be the first pick for the Bills, given the fact that they traded Stephon Diggs and they let Gabe Davis go to Jacksonville in free agency. What did you kind of make of the Bills and how they went about team building this past weekend at the NFL draft?
Well, anytime a team trades down, what they're telling you, what the trade down is, they're not trading down because they just want to do it. It's not fun and games. They're trading down because their horizontal board has enough players to recoup another player. And again, you can't be in love. The NFL draft requires you have a narcissistic personality and incapable of love. You just can't. You can't fall in love. It's one of the biggest mistakes we've all made, me included. We all make it. We fall in love with the player, and we get so preoccupied with the player, we don't look at all the alternatives. And I think what Bean did was smart. I mean, look, just because Kansas City said that he's going to be a starting receiver, look, Kansas City is, for all their greatness, they've had as many. I mean, Hardeman never worked out. You think Tony's worked out in that trade for them, right? So like let's not anoint them into the Hall of Fame of drafting. I mean, they're good. Don't get me wrong, but they're just like everybody else. They're going to make their mistakes, and they've made them at receiver. So like just because they like Worthy doesn't make Worthy the greatest receiver in the history of football. And so what I think what Buffalo did was, look, we have a cluster of receivers that we have graded the same. And if we could pick up another player, then let's go ahead and do it, And so they pick up other guys that they feel like they liked, and and then they go from there. They get a free safety that they liked, and Cade Bishop. They get a defensive tackle that they liked, and Dwayne Carter. So they picked up extra picks, and they got Coleman, who probably was rated higher than Worthy on their board. Mm-hmm. And again, it comes back to the evaluator, right? All this is bullshit because, like, the process is bullshit because it takes talent to evaluate talent. If Buffalo's right with Coleman, it's a great deal. If they're wrong, it's not. It comes down to the evaluation.
The sneaky good pick that I like from the Bills was their running back, Ray Davis, out of Kentucky. That guy is physical. I remember watching him this past college football season.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how physicality has been something that Buffalo has been yearning for over these past couple years. It's why they want to go to that 12 personnel. They want to run the football a little bit more because they play in Western New York. Guess what it's going to be in December and January? It's going to be snowy. It's going to be windy. It's going to be shitty weather. You need physicality to be able to still move the football when the conditions aren't ideal.
Right, and that's where I had a problem with Chicago. Like, Odunze's a good player. Again, this is players, and this is really about team building. This isn't about the player's not a good player, right? Everybody's delighted that Chicago took Odunze. I don't know how. I know Keenan Allen's over 30, so he'll be the starter next year. But, like, there's two starting defensive tackles are Andrew Billings, who was a free agent from Las Vegas, and Dexter, the senior Dexter, the kid they drafted in the second round. Mm-hmm. Don't tell me they couldn't put Murphy. Murphy would have been a great pick. Don't tell me they couldn't have picked Latua as another rusher to go along with Sweat. If you're running Matt Eberflus's scheme, you don't have enough defensive linemen, right? And for them to take another receiver when they have all these, I'm not saying don't take a receiver, but do you have to take one on the 9th pick and use all your assets? You traded a second rounder for Claypool. You traded picks for Keenan Allen, right? Like at some point you got to be able to find a receiver somewhere, and you can't find three techniques. I mean, this defensive team for the Bears, just so we're aware of it, this defensive team that they have, they had added 0 players in their draft, 0, that are going to contribute to their team this year. They added a 5th-round pick in Booker, a defensive end. Think he's going to contribute? I doubt it. Maybe next year, 2 years from now. But what you're saying as the Chicago Bears, we're solid as a rock on defense. Are they?
They played better in the second half of last year, but you want to keep adding to it is the thing, especially in the division that you play in, where you have Jordan Love, who looks like a star.
Especially when you're a defense. I mean, especially when you say they played better in the second half of the season. That's the perception. But then when they couldn't stop Green Bay. Remember that game?
Yeah, I mean I think they held them to like 17 points. I mean, that might have been more on the offense, and that's why they have a new quarterback.
Well, it could
Chicago.
be, but I just have a hard time passing a 3 technique, especially when last year there was all this talk that they really wanted to be involved with Carter.
Yeah. No,
and here's the other thing too, so we're aware of it. Are we sure they're good enough at tackle with Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones?
I'm not so sure about that. That's the one that I probably would have tried to address, that like offensive line. Just keep adding to the O-line, because that's rookie quarterbacks. Oftentimes when they fail, it's because they're not getting enough protection, and then they start picking up these bad habits, and then it just kind of derails from there. So maybe they feel comfortable with the O-line.
Well, they took the Yale kid.
Yeah.
They took the Yale kid, so we'll see how that works out. You always look to Yale when you need an offensive lineman.
He's intelligent. Hopefully he can play well. All right, we'll wrap up some other NFL draft thoughts, as well as get to some veteran free agent signings here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
All right, let's continue our draft analysis here. I know a team that you wanted to highlight, Michael, was the Pittsburgh Steelers, who addressed offensive line early in this draft with their first couple of picks. Troy Fautanu out of Washington, they took him 20th overall. Then, of course, Zach Frazier, the center out of West Virginia in the second round. Is the Steelers, hey, like they haven't been below 500. Stop me if you've heard that before. And they continue to kind of address the areas that they know lead to winning football.
Yeah, I think did a really good job. They clearly understood what their team needs were. They've been fixing this offensive line now. They've got Broderick Jones, who they drafted in the first round. Now they got Zach Frazier, who's a really good guard, a center in there. They needed that badly. They've signed Daniels and Samalo from the Eagles, Sumulo from the Eagles, if that's how you say his name. I apologize if it's wrong.
Say
and then they
Amalo,
get the left tackle from Washington. Yeah, but to me, I think the one pick that jumps out to me is the Peyton Wilson pick. The kid's coming off a 2, he didn't have, his medical was the problem. He's a first-round talent, but obviously the medical was an issue. He goes in the third round, doesn't have an ACL or something like that. I'm not sure. But what they've been trying to do in Pittsburgh is replace Ryan Shazier for years. Now, they signed Patrick Queen. I think that was good for them, obviously. But this team is really improved. And they won 10 games, and this is a much better team than any of the last 2 teams have been. They really are.
Yeah.
And I think they'll be able to compete. And if Wilson – and look, I think Arthur Smith is getting a bad rap because Arthur is, being viewed as a head coach when we know as an offensive coordinator he's pretty damn good. Mm-hmm. Run play action. He'll find a way. Pickens I'm sure he'll have a good year. I love the Roman Wilson pick for them as the third receiver. Freiermuth to me is a true Y in the league. He can play on the line and he can get open. And they got a lot of pieces here. They really do. And I don't think you can count them out. I mean, they're going to be physical. They're going to be tough. I like Pittsburgh a lot. I thought they did a good job. And again, this isn't because they drafted offensive line. This is because they clearly knew they need to fix their offensive line. They didn't ignore it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's part of the key element of all this is to make sure you fix what you have to fix.
Yeah, those must-haves. You got to go ahead and get those done when you can, and the Steelers addressed it with those first couple of picks there. We saw on Thursday night a record number of quarterbacks, the 6 in the first 12 picks, which was unprecedented in NFL draft history, but we didn't get to see another quarterback go until pick 150 with Spencer Rattler going to the New Orleans Saints. That's a new record, 138 picks between the selections of Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler, which is pretty wild. Like I remember I was in San Diego for a wedding. I was checking my phone on Friday to see if any of these these quarterbacks went in the draft, and I was like, had to double check. I was like, damn, nobody got drafted. And then I just kind of saw Saturday morning they finally took Rattler, who I know that he was a guy that people thought that maybe he could be a Friday selection, but clearly the league saw it differently, and they went ahead and the Saints grabbed him at 150 overall.
Well, I mean, it's hard. He's 6 feet tall. He can't really run. He doesn't really bring anything to the, he's smart, really good. He's got instincts. I mean, all those things check in his favor. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he'll be really good in the preseason. There's no question. But, can he beat out Herner, the kid from Fresno State that they drafted in the 4th round last year? And, they signed Kellen Mond. They got Peterman on the team. They got 5. I don't know how you practice 5 quarterbacks. I really don't. I don't know how you practice 5. Will they cut one of those? Will they cut Peterman? I mean, he's over 30. You going to bring him to camp now that you drafted a kid in the 5th round? I don't know. That's the hard thing to do is you got to figure out how you're handling the depth chart, who's getting the reps. But classic of Mickey Loomis, which I agree with, he went right for offensive lineman. He went right to Fauga, got himself a left tackle, and he's trying to fix that offensive line.
Did Baltimore get an A from you in your draft grades?
They didn't get an A. Well, probably because they picked so low in the draft. I'm sure that. But look, I mean, Baltimore. One thing when you look at Baltimore's team, the key to the Baltimore's team is not this year's draft. Obviously, Wiggins gives them a corner, right? But to me, it's going to be, are they good enough at some of these young offensive linemen that they drafted, right? Yeah. Voorhees is a kid for left guard. Can Falali from Minnesota, or is it going to be Rosengarten going to be the starting right tackle, right? Whatever that one is. And so all their young players, right? All their young players. I mean, the Trenton Simpson kid who they drafted in the 3rd round, he's got to come in and play for them. He's got to fill the Patrick Queen. That's really what it comes down to is last year's draft, can they come in and play? Brandon, they've got to find a way that those young players, and that's how you win in this league when you're paying a lot of guys. When you're paying a lot of guys a high level of money, you got to find a way to offset that, And I think they certainly can, and they'll get depth. So, yeah, I mean, look, if Wiggins and Rosengartner start, you get an A for that. You get 2 starters where they're picking down there.
Yeah,
that's pretty damn good. Because again, this draft was diluted, and what most of the guys picked from 20 back would have been typically 2nd rounders. We know all the quarterbacks got inflated up. The defensive players. I mean, what Indy did to get Latua is remarkable. I think there's a video of Ballard saying, I can't believe none of these defensive players are getting picked.
I think he was quoted saying, we got the best fucking edge rusher in the draft, is what he said.
He did. Yeah. And John Schneider got the best 3 technique in the fucking draft at 16. I mean, Schneider's probably sitting there in his room like, wait a minute, what am I missing here? What's wrong? Like, how is this guy, how did they deliver this guy? I would have traded up to get this. I would have given away picks to get this guy. And you're putting him in my lap at 16? Like that's when, you really benefit from, and you know who did a great, Ozzie used to do this all the time. And sometimes it was by happenstance. It was serendipitous. He gets Ed Reed because he wants Napoleon. I mean, he just sits there. Todd Heap makes it to him. We don't draft Todd Heap because we signed Roland Williams. Don't ask me why we draft Derek Gibson. That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, but we all thought we were drafting, Todd Heap. Next thing you know, here comes Derek Gibson, who literally had no instincts to play football. 0. He saw the game through a straw, and so we all knew it too, but he was size, speed, we picked him. That pick was out of the blue. But anyway, so, just sit there and let somebody else fuck it up. I mean, Schneider's sitting there, he gets Sam Howell for nothing, right, who would be a good quarterback in this draft, and he gets Murphy for basically sitting at 16. And I tell you, if Latua would have been there, they would have turned Murphy in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I mean, it's really remarkable that stuff happens where it's just, hey, we're just going to sit and pick and let a good player fall to us, a guy that they thought they might have to trade up for, and, hey, they went ahead and were able to get him at their current spot. Let's get to some of these veteran guys, though, because we saw this morning, Monday morning, we're taping this right now, it's 11:15 Eastern Time, 8:15 West Coast time, a reunion down in Dallas, Michael. My guy Ezekiel Elliott, he's back in the fold. 1 year, $3 million deal, $2 million guaranteed, as the Cowboys kind of reunite with Zeke Elliott, who said that he wanted to finish his career as a Dallas Cowboy. He wants his legacy to be as a Dallas Cowboy after 1 year in New England.
He wasn't bad last year at New England. I mean, he doesn't have the incredible burst to the edge that he once had, but he still ran with power, hard to tackle. Look, I think the Cowboys got 2 players in the first 3 rounds that will give them, or maybe in the first 2 rounds, the Neyland defensive end kid that they drafted in the second. They get a really good player in BB at the 3rd rounder who's going to come in and start for them. And Guyton's got to be the left tackle. I mean, for all the needs that they had, and they had plenty of them, I mean, the Cowboys addressed them. And the Cowboys offseason is really going to be so critical because they've got to get Guyton to play and play well. Yeah. They've got to get BB to play and play well. And they've got to get Neyland to play and play well. And if they can get that, they can fill some holes on their team, and that can really make a huge difference to them.
Yeah, they got to get Mozzie Smith to play well.
I get the sense, and I'd love to hear what you think on it. I get the sense that they think Deuce Vaughn could be their Tony Pollard. Do you think that?
Ooh, to me, I mean, he's so small. And I don't know if he has that sort of explosion that Tony Pollard has. Like, he's a quick guy, but he doesn't have the acceleration of Pollard. If they think that, I mean, he played last year at times, and I thought he didn't play. But.
I mean, he may not. Maybe they see him as Sproles.
Yeah.
I mean, Sproles was dynamic.
Yes, Sproles was. I mean, he was unbelievable. I don't see him as being as fast as Sproles, but I think he's definitely quick. That's for sure. So, I mean, he's going to need to take another step forward if they're going to use him in that role because, like, what we saw last year, and that's not the throw. He was a rookie running back. Like, he's a late-round guy. He wasn't expected to light the world on fire. They just need him to be better than what he was last year. Rico Dowdle, I know they're kind of high-ish on Rico Dowdle as a guy that could be, and he showed some signs last year when Pollard was kind of mixing in and out of it, but they clearly needed some power, and at least Ezekiel Elliott will give them some power in the backfield because there was times last year where it's like you wanted Pollard to be able to finish a run, and he couldn't quite do it, where it's like, hey, if this were Zeke Elliott, yeah, he might not have the explosion to get outside, but he can at least finish runs, especially in short yardage.
Right, and in the 4th round when all these backs started to really go, and the Dallas didn't react to it. San Francisco takes the Garendo kid from Louisville, really fast, one of the fastest guys at the combine. San Francisco does a great job evaluating running back. So that kid obviously is a good player. The Allen kid from Washington, he goes. And I mean, there was a lot of guys that went in that 4th round that you thought perhaps, that the Cowboys I thought they were waiting on a guy, but they really didn't. They didn't pull the pin on it. They never really pulled the pin on it, which tells me they like somebody on their roster better than they like some of these guys.
Yeah, and they didn't have a 4th round pick. They had 2 in the 3rd, and they had a 5th rounder. So, but they were never going to reach for a guy like they sometimes go into these drafts with needs, but they just say we're going to stick to our board. And in their defense, like Will McClay, Stephen Jones, like those guys have done a really good job drafting. So especially at offensive line, I give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, okay, like they know what they're doing clearly at that position. Everybody that they've drafted, whether it's Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, Travis Frederick, Tyler Smith last year, like all these guys have worked out for them. So I at least have faith in that regard. So, but I mean, we'll see what happens. But they've done typically a pretty good job of drafting and building out a solid roster.
No, that's been the success. They find guys. They let Dalton Schultz go. Here's Jake Ferguson.
Yep.
That's how you have to manage it. And that comes from player development. You got to have the ability to develop the players. And sometimes if you have too many guys, then all of a sudden now the coach becomes a general manager and not a developer because he starts to pick who he should develop when in reality they don't always pick the right guy.
A couple things before we get out of here. The Niners, they did not entertain any trade offers, it sounds like, for Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuel, despite what was reported that those guys could be on the move. Is this whole thing just going to be a nothing burger and both guys will be on the team this fall, or maybe something happens a little bit further down the line here before training camp gets underway?
Well, I think, look, there was no way. I don't know if the Niners liked Odunze or not, but once Odunze came off the board, there was no player equal to Aiyuk or better than. Why would they trade a player for a draft pick? Again, you got to put the name of the player into the draft pick. Who am I trading him for, right? And I think Deebo is another guy, high salary. You got to know what you're doing with Deebo, right? You got to really understand he's a running back that plays receiver. He's an inside receiver. They do a great job with him. But I'm not saying that they want to trade him. I'm just saying what they have to do is Aiyuk gives them that outside guy that they really need. I never thought they would because he's unique of their receiving core. He's really kind of a different guy.
Yeah, and Aiyuk is Brock Purdy's favorite
You know the
target.
kid I like they drafted? Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Arizona. I like the Cowling kid a lot. The Cowling can play in the slot. He gives him a returner. He's a 4-down back. I like him a lot. I like the tight end that Cincinnati picked in the 6th too, because I've watched him enough to know. And as much as I love that Big Daddy had to eat crow, because when they picked Jordan Morgan, I mean, it was so good. He was predicting defensive back. So you know what he said to me after I said, well, they picked it out. He said, Goot must be listening to him. I said, he's not paying any attention to you at all whatsoever. Trust me. Just like I'm sure if Goot came on the work site, you wouldn't listen to him about what you want to do in terms of additions on this house.
he's got a direct line to Goot, and then they made sure they didn't take a they took a deep Javon Bullard out of Georgia. They took him in the 2nd round, so he had to wait a few selections before they took a DB. But Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle out of Arizona, was the Packers pick at 25. Where it's one of those, they have a good offensive line, but strength and a strength, and the Packers go ahead and do that, taking Jordan Morgan. Last note here before we get out of here, Christian Barmore, congratulations to him, 4-year deal with the New England Patriots, max value of $92 million. It's being reported as the largest deal the Patriots have signed since Tom Brady. So Christian Barmore, who is a talented player, he goes ahead and gets a deal for New England, and he's got his nice extension.
Where'd they get? Did he just show up on camp? He must have just showed up there. Because there's no way Bill could have drafted anybody with any ability that you would want to re-sign. So he must have just showed up there. That's a great recruiting job by New England. Wonderful. Look, that kid's really talented. If he stays healthy, wow, watch out. I mean, he's got to stay healthy.
Yeah, it's largest non-Tom Brady contract in Patriots franchise history, is what they're saying.
It's amazing how he just showed up. He must have liked the Patriot place.
He did.
He must have liked that. That's what got him to go there. Yeah, I thought so.
Usually just mosey your way on up there to Foxborough, just knocked on the door and said, hey, can I play for you guys? And the rest is history.
Yeah, please, I want to play here. Yeah, because there's no way anybody would have drafted me, right?
No way in hell. All right, that does it for this edition of the GM Shuffle. We'll continue, obviously, throughout the offseason. Rookie camps are going to start getting underway. We'll start getting these guys on the field. And before you know it, OTAs, mini camp, and, hey, we'll be off and running in this offseason, and it'll be August in a matter of moments, and we'll be right back in the thick of things. But lying season's over. Propaganda season is now here. Everyone's first-round pick looks amazing in rookie camp.
We're going to the Super Bowl season is on. Yeah, we're a Super Bowl contender now. Watch this.
Yep, we're a contender. We added the guys we needed in the draft. But for our producer, Elliott Bowen, with us on the 1s and 2s, as always, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Michael, I will see you later this week with another edition of the GM Shuffle. Be well until then.
Thank you, Femi.